Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. Today, we are honored to have Ryan join us. Ryan is the CEO of Neuvik, and Ryan's last name is Leirvik, and there's a story there. And we're going to connect the dots here in a second, but you should look up on him. He is an author. He has written the book, Understand, Manage, and Measure Cyber Risk, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But he's an awesomely qualified person. You know, he has been in cyber research and development. He's served as the chief of staff and associate director of cyber for the US DoD. He has been a cyber strategist with McKinsey and Company and a technologist with IBM. We're honored to have you here, Ryan. Thank you for spending a couple minutes with us here.
Manoj, thanks for having me. It's my honor, really. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So for our audience, you know, your company's name is Neuvik and your last name is Leirvik.
Coincidence?
There's a limerick in there somewhere. Connect the dots for us, please. I'm sure this is a great origin story.
Oh, sure. Yeah, happy to. And it's funny, it kind of maybe goes back a little bit to sort of what you're reading from the bio there. So back when I was at the DoD, we were doing offensive cyber warfare, right? And so I was also trained in incident response. And I got discussions from some clients or soon to be clients about, hey, can you help sort of frame out some incident response stuff? This is way back like 20 years ago. So I needed a name, right, for an organization to sort of spin up. And I just won a Garmin newbie from a SANS hacking course right back in like 2003 or 2004. Yeah. And just won one. I thought, oh, this is great, right? Like I love the newbie because, you know, it was gave you directionally accurate, directions to where you were going. And I needed a top level domain. So I figured, well, why not a relic of my first hacking, win with my last name, and Neuvik won out. So there you have it.
That's a great story. What do you guys do at Neuvik?
So we do three things, right? So what we think are sort of the cornerstones of service, right? We're a pure play cybersecurity services company. What does that mean? Is we provide sort of the white glove service on red teaming. So that's our sort of advanced assessments. So we'll do anything from like very, very advanced sort of pen testing to actual red team emulations inside the environment to find vulnerabilities, to training. So we run a training division that teaches individuals in, say SDLC, trying to shift left in security, right? And then of course, the third piece is risk management, because that's where it all sits, right? We got to be able to communicate this to executives and managers to understand what's the actual risk of the vulnerabilities we find, or what's the actual risk of, that we're reducing through the training of SDLC. So we do those three things from a services standpoint.
That's fantastic. And I got to take it that business is probably doing very good given the current environment.
Yeah, it's one of those businesses you kind of want to work yourself out of, but given the business environment, yes, absolutely. There's a significant amount. I mean, in our world, Manoj, it's interesting. We just keep seeing, sort of imperfect technology layered on imperfect technology, and us expecting it to interoperate perfectly, right? And it doesn't work that way. So we have to, us and other services organizations come in and say, all right, here's where the holes are, right? Here's why they're important. Here's how to fix them. Now fix them so that you don't have some sort of material impact, from the risk management side on your business.
There is a lot to unpack in that last statement that you just made. And it's true. I think often, almost 99.999% of the time, if I'm at a social event and someone out of the cybersecurity who's not in the world comes up and talks to me, they're thinking cybersecurity, black hoodie, back room, high tech, people that are just coding or hacking or doing. It's the typical stereotype in the layperson's mind. But it's really not. I mean, a good chunk of this problem is not a tech problem. It's a human behavioral issue. It's a business problem in many respects, right?
Yeah, 100%, Manoj. In fact, I would say it starts with the business decision of getting into information technology. Like that's where the problem begins, right? And then the decision on whether or not to layer in significant, investment or priority of security, which is to say we know where this IT is, information technology is connected to, what it's doing, how it's working the way we expect it to work, right? That's where the problem actually begins, right? Versus the opposite of that is chasing the shiny object and buying cool things and just asking your IT folks to plug them into the network without really understanding sort of how they interoperate, right? Which just creates massive amounts of holes. Well, could potentially
It
create.
can, yeah.
Yeah.
But why is it so prevalent then that exactly what you said in the latter piece of this is exactly what's happening? Everyone is out there looking for the next gadget. As soon as the next buzzword comes up, XDR, zero trust, ZTNA, whatever the heck it is, and I'm sure there's more. God knows how many acronyms. We have more than the U.S. military, but everybody goes to that. But how about why not look at process, people, what's worth protecting first, and then kind of work backwards as to what really needs to be layered in?
It's way too
You were at
logical.
McKinsey. I was never that smart. So what's the story?
Oh, don't conflate me being there and being smart by any stretch. Just sometimes we get lucky in our careers, right? So, yeah, look, it's interesting because businesses are all organized differently, right? They're organized to be in business for something, right? Or let's just say even organizations are organized differently. It might not be in business. You might be a government entity or just providing a service, not for profit, so maybe not quite a business per se, a for-profit business, but in business. And the organization side of it isn't always thought through right off the bat, right? Sometimes it's more about trying to do whatever it is we're trying to do without thinking through the underlying information technology pieces that we may need, right? How they're actually going to interoperate, and oh, by the way, what's really important to protect that's critical to the business or the organization, so that we need to be mindful of putting proper controls around there. And you laid it out nicely, because there's that systems, I can tell you're an engineer, right? That systems thinking behind what you just laid out isn't always there when business decisions are made. And sometimes they're made without understanding, in our case, impact to what critical systems may create some sort of material impact to the business, right? But you can tell that systems thinking that you just laid out not always is there. And so the argument is it starts with the business process, the business decision of purchasing some tool or capability that may or may not fit in the ecosystem that we currently have.
Is there anything in your experience that would guide a newbie CXO, right, in getting their arms around the world of cyber without getting mired in technology, which is what their IT or CISO is going to do to them? What can they do to actually get a baseline understanding of what they're dealing with here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I like breaking it down into the classic threes, right? First, understand what problem it is you're actually solving for, right? Two, get that problem under management. And then three, we all love measures, right? Get some sort of measure, like a performance measure or a risk measure, if you will, that measures that performance. And that's the systems thinking, Manoj, that you laid out, that in a security point of view, if you're just getting started, right, can be wickedly helpful. Because look, in a world where we have multiple layers from a CXO perspective, right? We have multiple layers of individuals who have some sort of either say in what you're doing, demand on what you're doing, or expectation, or some combination of the three. Sure. You've got the executive team above you that you have to report to on what may or may not be a well-defined definition of hey, what's our cyber risk, right? You got your peers, right, at the executive level to say, hey, I need to invite the legal team in, right, or the procurement team, which may or may not be in legal, right, and maybe the IT side isn't necessarily in the CXO side, right? So you got to bring in the risk team or the technologist side or the IT side. So you got to work across all your peers, and then you got to lead teams to success, and that's the management side all at once. So. For me, as these patterns start to unfold themselves in all organizations, to me, the three pieces really are: understand what the problem is you're actually solving for from a cyber standpoint, right? And that's, have a clear definition of risk, if you will, right? define that in a way that defines sort of material impact. This sounds all easy as we're going through it, right? But these are the fundamentals, right? And then have that under management, like choose a way of managing that covers, what you're actually trying to manage, and then have performance measures that actually speak to your ability to manage that. Those are sort of the three things it seems like are the fundamental pieces. And if you take care of those and have that sort of through line through everything, it has this interesting impact intended impact to get focused on what problem it is we're solving for, so that when these things get thrown at you, you at least have a place to put them over time.
So one of the things that, and I'm going to speak just for my personal self here, that I have seen, at least historically in this industry, is that companies, believe it or not, Ryan, have a very difficult time when it comes to the risk conversation, first defining what is it that they're protecting. And,
Yes.
and I kid you not, and I'll give our listeners a little bit more color on this, so I'm not going to leave everybody hanging. It's like, because people will be like, what the hell do you mean? You don't know what the hell you're guarding. So I've used this example on the air a couple times without naming the company, but there's a major motion picture house that absolutely, I will not mention it, but I guarantee you that whoever's listening to this has definitely seen movies from them. 1,000%. It's impossible they did not. Now, they don't have a CISO. They have CISOs, multiple CISOs across different groups. Now, if you know something about movie production, it is a layered process that goes from team to team. There's a team doing the shoot, a team doing the editing, and then there's people compiling and putting it all together. Well, in the very end, what used to be the cutting room floor, which is all digital now, that cutting room floor, which contains the final product ended up on a server that was open to the world. Right? So you think a company spends $110 million in the production of a major motion picture, and it ends up on a server that is unguarded because it's being used by a small group of people that are editing it and putting together, and they got their own little setup going, right? Mm-hmm. That's not figuring in anyone's risk equation, right? So what is it that you're guarding? And in that case, their mission should have been guard our IP, which is movies. That's what we make, and find that wherever it is. But this is a major company with an infinite budget. It didn't work. So how?
Yeah. It's especially if you're going to publish something that might upset somebody else. It might make you a target for something, right, that you otherwise wouldn't want. So yes, there's all of that, right, and that's the challenge. And I think you strike to the core of what the problem is, which is, do we understand what's actually critical inside the business? Like what do we need to protect? What's worthwhile protecting? And then how do we put controls around those? So in this case, whether or not, it just happens to be, hypothetically speaking, a movie that, upset a large, let's just call it area, to be as obscure as we possibly can, that would then turn their attention to you to heighten their adversarial response, let's just say, right?
Yep.
Absent that, right, because that's just the threat side of it, right? If we kind of really break down the security landscape, like that's a threat, right? That probably didn't exist before the publication of this hypothetical movie that you're talking about, right?
Right.
But the interesting thing is, the threat is actually less relevant in this, as to your point, is the critical information, which is the intellectual property of the movie, especially prior to release, exactly. Before it gets out there and it's distributed and you start to lose ownership control and things like that because of the supply chain that is, or the distribution chain that is movie production, right? The issue here is, do we know what's important? And if released prior, if let's take the CIA, right? If the confidentiality of it, the integrity, the availability of said item, yep. Right, is disturbed in any way prior to us not owning that timeline, what's the material impact, to the business itself? And without understanding that up front, you don't know what problem you're solving for, right? And two, what controls to put in place. And like you say, like, the production server with access to the final product, right, may or may not have solved the problem. We're not going to get into that piece of it, but at least you know what's important, right? And that's where I think, Manoj, to your point, like this is where we start to lose the essence of why we're actually why we're even having the cybersecurity discussion in the first place, right? It's, we there's all this, there used to be, it still is, but back in the, 10 years or more, it was all about FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's like, oh my gosh, like what happens if somebody hacks my phone? It's like, well, what if somebody hacks your phone? Like, does it matter? Right. And there's a lot of uncertainty in there and fear in that. And so we start to see the problem bigger than it is. And so, if we react to a problem where we don't fully understand what it is, well, we're going to wind up with a lot of inefficiencies in decision making. Right. But, the way to do this is, as you say, let's sort of flip it to like, all right, what's really important? Is it the intellectual property of this particular piece? Okay, great. What are we doing to protect that? Who's authorized to have access to either the editing content, right, or the final product once made? Great. How do we know that those people are acting in the right way? Okay, great. We have compensating controls over that. Okay. So, look, nation states do this quite well. And most, like the Department of Defense does this quite well. You know very clearly what's confidential, what's secret, what's, top secret, right? And then the components above that. But most organizations don't necessarily have that problem unless you're in, legal entities, right? Law firms and others, or banks for that matter. And so I think that's really it. And back to your sort of root question on this CXO side, getting back to defining what it is we're actually protecting and why it matters, it helps to, one, protect it, right, and put compensating controls around it. But two, which is the big piece, it helps to define the problem that we're actually solving for. So when we start talking about resources, we start talking about, time, people, actual cash, budgets to put towards things, we know what it is that we're actually dealing with, right?
And, you described it really well when you said, you need to know what you're protecting. Then you need to know if the people around it are behaving appropriately. Mm-hmm. And then you're talking about compensating controls. So technology doesn't really come in until step 3, right? There's so much that can really happen with, I'm going to say, probably the most underutilized cybersecurity asset in the company is the people themselves, is, bringing that awareness level of that group up can probably do better than any firewall is going to ever do for you. Mm-hmm. Not saying firewalls aren't important, guys. I'm not beating on those. It just came out, but it's really about if you can affect the human behavior with an A, then you can effect cybersecurity risk in a positive fashion.
Hands down, Manoj. And here's a perfect example of how. Remember, we probably shouldn't say, when the defenses are so high, right? And there's a critical asset somewhere that somebody wants, they're going to impact the individual. They're going to go for the human, right? I think Stuxnet taught us that, right? Right. With the centrifuges. So like the issue there is you can protect the heck out of everything, but like it's it all starts with us, like humans. Like we create, we either for some reason, or we either create bad code, right? And or insecure applications. We push them into some cloud instance somewhere, which is even more insecure, depending on who actually architects it and pushes it out, right? And then we expect it all to work perfectly without saying, hey, what's actually critical in here? Like who's the person that actually does this, and did they have the right training? Do they actually know what they're doing? Because a lot of these times it's just a simple mistake. Right, we see this in cloud infrastructure all the time. It's like, hey, let's push the cloud. Okay, great. Why? Well, because like we're going to gain all these efficiencies in not having on-prem systems. Okay, terrific. Well, as you push your architecture there, your infrastructure there, like those that are architecting the cloud infrastructure, right? Buckets, blobs, whatever you wind up choosing from a provider standpoint, are they trained well enough to know simple things like not to market public, so it gets pushed all entirely, so the entire internet can scrape it, right. Identify, well, not the internet itself, but those actually doing that. But on the other side of it, it's like, do they know what the sensitivity of the data is and what protections do you have in place? And it's just like bringing it down to that core set of like, this is what's important and what's not, is the start of the conversation. And look, the reality here is like, it's hard. right? Let me say this another way. It's simple, but it's not easy, right? And it's simple. There's enough guidance out there right now for any organization, like especially a new, CXO type, to try to find out, like, all right, what do we mean by impact? Like, well, how do we know it's important? I mean, heck, we just saw the SEC come out with new laws, right? And the rules are, you have to, anything that's going to be a material impact within a certain amount of time needs to be reported, and it better be on, the Q4 filing, or the next quarter filing. Like, that's a big deal. Now industries are scrambling, like, oh, what do we mean by impact? Well, there's plenty of materials out there that can very quickly, right, identify what we mean by, material, and usually in some sort of set of categories, right, that makes sense to the business. So such as like lost access, right, lost work, lost penalties, or fines and penalties, right, legal activities. We always forget about how much lawyers are going to cost when we actually get into a big breach, like the one you mentioned with the entertainment company, right? Lost business or impact, or even IR. I mean, we forget, on a huge breach with a lot of customer data, especially if you have PHI or a lot of PII from the healthcare standpoint. I mean, your incident recovery is going to be huge, because your legal activities and your incident recoveries are going to go sky high. And understanding within an order of magnitude is the important part, to say, all right, is it $1 million or is it 10 million? Or is it 100 million? Like, where are we? And just understanding sort of that from a critical asset standpoint can help any new CXO sort of jump in, like, okay, I now know what, if breached in some way, is going to create the highest level of impact to the business. So why don't we start there? And now all of a sudden you got a priority list,
That sounds
it was that easy.
amazingly simple.
Yeah.
But what typically happens is that CXO is going to say, all right, CIO or CISO, this is what I pay you for. Come back and give me the program.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. And in the meantime, right, answer these questions for the board, answer these questions for the team. Oh, by the way, like, hire new people or give me your budget. And so this is the problem, where we're pulled in so many different directions. But I'll tell you, Manos, like, in my experience and what I've seen from a lot of individuals and clients, this is where the industry frameworks come in, right? I know we love to push and pull on them all the time, right? And it's fun. And look, we hear about them all the time. And not one framework is perfect for any one organization. It's just, they're just not, right? But they can act as a really good guide to say, categorically, these are the things I need to pay attention to. And now that I'm paying attention to those, now I can sort of build the bespoke or more customized pieces inside of those categories that fit the way my business operates and what I think is critical. And that's where, that's where frameworks might come in. But those are not easy.
Are you partial to NIST? Are you partial to FAIR? Are you partial to ISO? Like, what's your personal experience been in this area? What's the difference between these frameworks?
Here's where we get the Rotten Tomatoes score, right? Like, how many people are going to throw tomatoes at the screen? All right, so here's where I stand professionally. We do a lot of work in North America, right? Most specifically in America, right? So the NIST CSF is great at the first of all, it's a great piece of work that sort of, when released, is very thoughtful about the future, and not to be hey, here's a regulated standard, right? It was the way NIST operates is very specific to, like, hey, let's think through where the problem's going to be in 10 years maybe, and put out sort of guidance there. And then, that's it. Like, let industry or everybody else adopt it. Now, if you're in the U.S. federal government, it's a different story, right? That's a regulated environment. Well, you can actually set the standards there. But in the private sector, right, in the commercial sector, even more specifically, like in the U.S., you don't really have the regulatory bodies forcing a type of framework, right? So I like the NIST CSF from the first three category, or the first three levels, right, which is first, right now 5, soon to be 6, foundational categories, right? Because they push what we should be thinking about, right? Identify what the issue is, identify what's most critical, protect that, detect any weird things that might be happening, right, on what your protections are. Oh, and by the way, like, when those break down, because they will, right, be able to respond and be able to recover, right? And it forces you into that categorical thinking to be like, okay, do I have things covered in that way? So I see it that way. Now it's not as strong on the control side, right? Where like an ISO 27001 might be, right? Largely because that's where NIST, the authors have mentioned, like, they don't mean to go that deep because they're not forcing individuals into those controls. So, I think from a North American, or at least a U.S. standpoint, right, then the CSF is a great starting point to just get your brain wrapped around like what the problem really looks like.
So no, that's great. Great answer. I mean, these are practical things because oftentimes, and I'll pick on FAIR for just a second. When you look at FAIR consulting, it's not cheap.
Mm-mm.
So if you're GE, you probably have a group inside your company that can do this. But if you are, a small business with 200 employees, for you to afford that kind of an exercise might have practical limitations to it. So
Mm-hmm.
the NIST, if you follow the guidelines and the framework, there's a lot of things you could do in house if you walk through it. Now,
Exactly.
you actually wrote the book on this, Understand, Manage, and Measure Cyber Risk. Tell us a little bit about that. Does the book act as a guide on how to go through a proper assessment?
It can, yes. More specifically, actually, the book is helpful for even the new CXO or board member or anybody that's just trying to understand why are we having this conversation about cyber, what's important, and how do I actually measure it, right? Like sort of the three things that are sort of top of mind for everybody these days. And here's why. You asked why I wrote it. Like the reality is, Manoj, we had conversations before, and and for the audience, like Manoj and I talked about, like when you're around long enough, you start to see these patterns start to unfold. And look, the one thing that I started to realize is like because in the earlier, say 10 years ago, it was really unclear what problem most were solving for. And granted, look, for those rolling out of the Department of Defense with, offensive cyber, it's pretty clear what the problem is. It was us.
Yeah.
So you flip that and you're like, all right, well, how would I defend against that? So that's one area. And what I was surprised at, having conversations with a significant amount of those in the hot seat that had to actually do this, or even at the board level who had to, properly oversee this, there were the same conversation kept coming up, like, of okay, what do we do about this risk? It's like, all right, we'll define the risk. Like, all right, what do we do about, let's say, North Korea? Like, well, that's not a risk, that's a threat, right? The threat is them, right? And whatever piece of, we won't get into the details of how they actually organize, but like, okay, let's say it's them. What vulnerabilities do you have in your organization that they could take advantage of, given these type of TTPs, that would lead to something critical that would then have material impact on the business? So North Korea is not a risk. North Korea is a threat, right? Log4j, we just went through it, right? Well, a little while ago, right? So what's the risk of Log4j? Well, what's the risk of what? That's a vulnerability. Now it's huge. It is wildly difficult to do, one, identify where it is in the supply chain, and identify where it is in your environment, right? And try to figure out what to do. It's a huge problem. But in and of itself, it's not a risk until it's apply to material impact to the business. And I started to realize like this isn't really well understood. So I'd kind of look around for, as I'm sort of helping organizations do this, looking for a guideline to say, Manoj, like, hey, read this. This seems to do it. Now the CISO handbook's really good on one of them, but I couldn't find something that's really spelled it out. So if you're a board member, you're in a CXO shop, right? You're a manager, and you're just an individual trying to figure this out. There wasn't something out there that said, here's what the problem is. Here's a handful of ways to solve it, right? And here's ways if you're solving it well. So I literally wrote this down and was having conversations with us and figured, all right, well, might as well just publish it. And so just put it out there as a book. And so it's a guide, to help answer any part of that problem that you're trying to solve for in a practical way, right?
You should have tried to get it under the For Dummies title because, not saying that doesn't imply anything about you, but it's such a foundational topic. And those books have been so good at addressing foundational things that if you're going to,
that's a really valid point. In sort of a new version just came out a handful of days ago, actually. And so the feedback I've gotten is, wow, there's a lot of humor in here. And so, there is a little bit of like, hey, you try to make it so simple that it's actually funny that we're having the conversation. And I love that idea, because maybe we could write a book on like cybersecurity for, I think one exists. Forgive me for not knowing that. But that's the essence.
There's a lot of technical rendition to it. It's not about what you're talking about is a practical use guide. And that is like something that's actionable. And we get this in our world with threat intelligence. Are you subscribed to a threat intelligence platform? What does that do if it's not actionable?
100%. Yeah, Manoj, I'll tell you, in briefing a lot of boards, what I find is really interesting, and forgive me for those that find this wildly valuable, but when you start with the threat, because what threat? Here's what we're seeing from the threat intelligence, and we're having this conversation. It's like, okay, why are we giving them the advantage, right? Why don't we flip that and say, hey, here's what's important to us. Here's what's gonna, from a material impact standpoint, like here's what's gonna do. Here's what's gonna hurt our business. By the way, here are the vulnerabilities associated with it, and here are the threats that are looking for those vulnerabilities that are such. And now you've got context for the threat. Because if we start there, we're just, great. It's fun. I love it. Like threat intelligence is amazing. And it's a lot of fun to see what people are up to and what they're doing, and the TTPs they're using and what tactics. And you're like, wow, I never really would have bounced from here to there, to do that. Or I didn't know that exploit existed, and they're exploiting it, right? Or this, you could build a proof of concept that quickly. But it's really fascinating. But the problem is, as you say, it's not actionable right away, right? And so you got to bring it back to like, why is the business in business in the first place, right? What if, that vulnerability and that threat came together to impact some sort of part of the business? Why would this actually matter? Okay, great. And now when you're in that practical space, what's really interesting, and this is Manoj, where I've seen the flip happen. Now when those, conversations about newsworthy pieces show up, now you have context for it. Like, oh yeah, that's really interesting. Well, this is what happened to a peer, right? Or a competitor in this space, and but we're not running on those systems. We don't have those vulnerabilities. So fortunately for that particular threat, it's a low priority for us, because we don't see it impacting us.
That should be part of your baselining before you start any kind of a program. In fact, what you're describing, if I was to paraphrase this another way for the audience, is would it be good to go to MITRE ATT&CK, like first go to and understand in your industry what kinds of breaches have taken place, go to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, look at what TTPs are being used to execute that, then look at who the major players are that are actually using those TTPs, right? So now you know who's actually likely, because risk is likely, right? It's the probability and magnitude of loss. So, right. So if you know who's likely to come after you, now you go look for those vulnerabilities and see, can you eliminate the likely? So you make it hard enough where people are like, you know what, there's other fish to go fry right now. We'll come back to these guys later.
And that's the essence of cybersecurity writ large right there. It's, can we spend just enough spend enough resources and time, right? Just enough resources. So time, energy, people, right? Money, just enough so that the attacker goes away, right? Slightly more than what the attacker is willing to put in. If we could do this, right? And then at that point, you're doing okay.
Yeah, at that point you won to live another day. And,
that's right. Exactly.
And the story keeps changing, but foundationally, that's not a bad approach, because we can't guard against 100% of everything. It's just not. And you reach a point of diminishing returns as well at some point where it's like, well, I mean, like you said, this isn't even a vulnerability here. Why are we putting in compensating controls for it?
That's right. So, yeah. And Manoj, we see a lot of this with measures, right? Measures have been an issue for a while. Like, do we have the right measures? And we see operational measures, that aren't actionable or informative, which just sort of, aren't really helpful to have a conversation with, but they're certainly fun, right? To ones that are actionable and are informative. But here's the unintended issue with spending a lot of time on getting the perfect, measure down with the right amount. Chances are pretty good, like you say, when that risk is actually realized, it's not going to be anywhere. It's not going to hit that exact number you're hitting with your risk assessment. It's just not, because there are going to be things that you don't know have, had dependencies on whatever the actual, breach or incident was, that's going to either drive up or drive down costs that you either did or did not assume. So the trick with measures is put in just enough time, right? You should invest just enough time in identifying the right measures that give you the right, indicators of risk holistically for the environment, that then allow you to spend more time mitigating those risks. If we spend too much time figuring out to the perfect, point of how
we'll
much,
never have it.
Yeah, it won't even be true when the risk actually is realized in the first place, right? It's like, it's a fun exercise. Don't get me wrong. Insurance companies love it, and it's actually a ton of fun for quants. But in the reality of cyberspace, maybe those resources could be applied mitigating it versus, and then once you strike a balance of like, we've got all these people mitigating the issue, so let's really get down to like what the perfect answer is. Okay, great. That's a resource allocation decision.
So, your organization, and you have been involved with red teaming and threat hunting and doing that at a world-class level. So I want to take a little bit of a different tact here and ask you the question of, what about leveraging vulnerabilities for offensive purposes? So let me give you an example. So if we know that in whatever industry we're in, this is a traditional approach threat vector, and it gets exploited, and there's a vulnerability that comes up over, why not leverage that vulnerability to give the bad guys a whole bunch of shitty information, and screw with them a little bit, So now, you did steal data, didn't you?
Yeah.
You're going to sell it? Please sell it, because the people buying it are going to be kind of pissed because they got a whole bunch of crap from you, right? Yeah. So turning the tables into, and we could open the whole conversation on offensive capabilities here then, in a way. Does anybody do that? Have you seen?
Well, let's say it this way. I'm going to break it down this way. First, not a lawyer. But number one, the idea of sort of hacking back and taking the offense from the U.S. commercial point of view is not legal. So let's just start with that, right? As much as we would love to do it inside of the U.S., let's say the boundaries of the U.S. And the laws, it's not necessarily legal. So that's
absolutely. But here I'm intentionally putting out bad stuff.
Exactly. So now we're in the world of like, what we're like sort of honeypots and honey pits and tar pits and things like that. Well, tar pits to slow them down. But that was like the idea of, putting information out there at false flags, if you will, right? So that those bite on it and take it is a wonderful idea. The challenge we've run into these days is that you've got to keep it so real and so active, because the sophistication level of the threats has increased to the point where they can identify, are these people who are accessing these documents real people in the organization? Are these documents or this data, or I'm just going to assume data, right? It's kind of a narrow scope. You get the idea, right? It's sort of like, are they real individuals? Is this real data? And especially given sort of the ML pieces, that have been thrown at it lately, you can tell pretty quickly whether it exists somewhere else in the organization or it doesn't. So that would be a great discussion with a real expert in that area, because to see from a defensive standpoint how the false flag obfuscated data world is playing itself out is a lot of fun. Because from the red teaming side, when we see it, we're like, oh yeah, like this is like 3 IT people that are in the security space, like managing these documents every few months, making them look like they're real. Okay, we're just going to blow right past that, right? But the way to actually make it look real over time, that could be an interesting, ML play, right? Where you actually point the machines to learn what good looks like, and then flip it from there. And I think we just came up with a business idea. Doing it.
Look, in the day of Chat GPT, man, I can use natural language processing. Say, here, this is good. Now you scramble this and turn this into bad. And we can create thousands of fake identities that look totally legit.
Manoj, that's not a bad idea, right? I'm certain like right now it's coming to us, and maybe somebody else had thought about this, but the generative side of just like generating real documents that, Right. Yeah. As long as you can obfuscate the metadata or actually assign a real user to it, right? So it actually looks legit, and tag it to all the pieces that you'll need to tag it to from an active, depending on if you're an Active Directory shop or not. But, make it look as real as possible. Yeah. Then you get into the, obscurity, security through obscurity, right? There's so much stuff out there that they got to figure out what's real, what's not.
Yeah, well, and again, if your objective is that they're like, you know what, let's just go over to these guys over here because it's just easier.
Yeah. Which is what you want them to do, right? You want them to be
What
like,
you
throw
want
their
them
hands
to
up, like,
do,
you know what,
'cause they're a
forget it.
business too, right? I mean, they want to ransomware somebody that's going to pay them money for the data. If you stole a bunch of dog poop, no one's going to pay you for it. So
No. Yeah. Unless somebody really needs that dog poop. Like there's some fertilizer, there's some organization out there going,
yeah.
no, don't mess with the dog poop because like I need that fertilizer. Like that's certain ingredients in it. Right.
Hey, listen, Ryan, we've got the 2-minute mark here. I want to give you some time to talk about anything, plug anything you'd like to, whatever. You got so much stuff going on, but the floor is yours. Let people know whatever it's coming up in your world and
oh wow,
what you'd like to share.
Yeah, happy to. So at Neuvik we're doing security assessments and training. So feel free to reach out if there's anything we can do. It's NEUVIK, pretty easy to find. But the more important piece here as well is sort of there's a book out there now called Understand, Manage, and Measure Cybersecurity. So like if you're worried about any piece of this, of like, hey, how do I actually get my brain around open source material that's out there, right? There's nothing really proprietary in it, other than the publisher will say it in the way it was put together. But there's a book out there to understand, manage, and measure cybersecurity. Like, give it a look, use it as a reference guide, and that's probably the best plug I could give right now.
Is there any way they can get a signed copy?
Yeah, it's great. So we'll be in, we call it Week in Vegas now because we're out there for a whole week for sort of
Black Hat.
Black Hat, DEF CON, B-Sides, and the Diana Initiative. So it is actually a Monday through the following Sunday week in Vegas, which is a long time to be out there. But
wow,
we'll be out there. So hit us up, Neuvik.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Ryan Leirvik. Feel free to hit me up. Yeah, and then I can give you a signed copy. I'll have plenty of them out there.
That's fantastic. Well, Ryan, it's been a pleasure having you here. Hope to have you back sometime and continue the conversation. We've barely scratched the surface of this thing. I really want to get into the offensive side of this and I don't want to put all the ideas out there, but I think it would be a lot of fun. That's the fun part of cyber.
That would be great. Yeah, happy to. So thanks so much for having me. Like, happy to come back and have a deep discussion on that. That'd be great. But Manoj, it was great. I really, really appreciate the time. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.